10:03. All right. I thought it was a few minutes early today. All of a sudden it's 10:03, so let's get started. So today I want to focus on the project reports, or any project-related stuff, or anything else. So by default, I'll go through a project report and go through code to show you how to find the code that I expect for a project report. Before I do that, come on, there we go. Homework 4 is released. So before we do that, I'll just do a quick overview of Homework 4, which I released last night. While I'm going through Homework 4, if anybody has recommendations or suggestions or whatever of which report to go through, I'll take whatever somebody says in the chat or shouts out, whoever has some demand. I like going through a report for a library that I don't know exactly what I'm going to find, because then it's more realistic of what I expect you to do with reports. If I go through a report and I know exactly where to click and everything, it's very misleading because I can go through it in like 10 minutes then, and it doesn't reflect how much you really have to do for these reports. It takes a long time. By the end of the lecture, I might not even get to the full end of a single report. So Homework 4, goodness, can I get dark mode on Google Docs? Is there an easy way to do that? There really isn't a native. I expected that to be, oh yeah, you just hit this button. Google doesn't have, you know what? Some things. Some things just frustrate me. And there's no background color even. All right, I'm not going to bother that. We'll just deal with it. So for Homework 4, authentication and HTTPS. So HTTPS, this is another topic that's like WebRTC in that it's new for the homework. Well, it's not new, but it's being resurrected and brought back in a very different way than the first time I did it. A better way, hopefully. And it's going to be confined to Objective 5. So this is basically the authentication homework, and we have some HTTPS content to do in Objective 5, just like Homework 3 is the Websocket homework, but there's a little WebRTC stuff at the end that isn't overwhelming, I'll say, as long as you have the rest of this stuff set up. So same thing, authentication and HTTPS. To start, Objective 1 doesn't have anything to really do with authentication, but we haven't done any cookies yet, and cookies will be required for authentication. So this is kind of your warm-up objective of how to set a cookie, and it's a visit counting cookie. So every time somebody requests your home page, you should display on the page how many times that particular user has visited your page, and you'll do that with a cookie. So the first time they visit, you're going to say, oh, you have no cookie. I'm going to set this cookie to say that you've visited this site one time. And then whenever you get a request that does contain a cookie, you're going to read the value, increment it by 1, and then set their cookie to the new value of the number of visits. And then also, depending on the value, rendering that in your HTML template and saying this is how many times you visited the page. So not too complex for a feature, but it does give you a lot of practice with cookies and figuring out how to set cookies server side. If you've messed with cookies at all, you probably set them client side. You went in the JavaScript, and in the JavaScript file, you said set cookie, max age, whatever. We're going to do the same thing, but client side. The way cookies work is through headers. So you're going to set a set cookie header, and then that's going to tell the browser to set that cookie. Just like the last few homeworks, I'm like, there's no way Objective 1's that big. I missed the header. Just like the previous homeworks, Objective 2 is the big one, authentication itself. So authentication, we're going to have a registration form, a login form, and those do what you would expect them to do, except a few little things that we're used to out in the world I'm not going to require. Like you're not going to have to type your password twice for registration. Just little things. I almost did, but I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like forcing that. Then what do I do if somebody doesn't check to see if the passwords match? I don't know. That's kind of not what I want the focus to be. And there's no password requirements. Other than that, we're going to build authentication as you would expect. someone registers and then they log in with that same username and password, they should be able to log into your app, and you're going to set a cookie that's going to be their authentication token. So when somebody registers, when someone logs in, their username and password is going to be sent along with that login request, that HTTP request that says, I want to log in, here's my username and password. After someone logs in, you want them to just be logged in. This is the feature that we like in most of our apps. We just want to be logged in after that. We don't want to type our username and password every single time we take any action ever on any website. That would be very, kind of make the internet a little bit more useless. It wouldn't be very user-friendly. People wouldn't use it as much. So we're going to set an authentication token, which is a random value that's going to be set in their cookies. It's going to be set as a cookie. And then whenever you get a request, you're going to look for that authentication token. And if it exists, look it up in your database, make sure it's valid, and then look up which username you issued that token to. And then you're going to assume that they are that user. So you don't have to type in their username and password every time. As long as they possess that token that you issued at login, you're going to treat them as that user. So set an authentication token, and then whenever somebody visits your website with that authentication token, with a valid authentication token, somewhere on the page, display their username, give them a welcome message, whatever you want it to be. As usual, you can change the front end as long as their username shows up somewhere. Whoever's logged in with that token, their username should be displayed somewhere on the page. And we have some security issues. Just a reminder, I always highlight the security issues with this red text. It's strongly recommended that you, after you submit the assignment, before you submit, I guess, look through all the security highlights and just make sure you didn't miss any of them before you submit. I got so many, I guess not so many, but a good number of students in homework 2 who got zeros on certain objectives because they just forgot to do the security thing. The hardest thing about the security stuff is just remembering to do it. So just remember to do the security stuff. I guess not with this. I mean, if you don't hash and salt your passwords, you just didn't pay attention in lecture, and you didn't do what you were supposed to do. But especially escaping HTML, the hardest thing is just remembering to do it. Just remember to escape your HTML. And then we have lengthy testing procedures for that one. And then authenticated chat. So this one's pretty open-ended. We have multiple ways of doing chat these days. HTML forms, Ajax, WebSockets. However you want to do authenticated chat is up to you. But whenever somebody chats, when they're logged in, their username should be displayed next to their messages, just like we would expect a chat app to do. So when they're logged in, make sure their username is associated with their messages. And then the actual mechanism. So I wanted to say, you have to use one of these 3, but there's no guarantee that everybody completed the one that I would choose. So whatever one you completed, if you only got through the forms on homework 2, go with that. If you did Ajax, we did Ajax. When did we do that? For the chat history in WebSockets, I think I gave you the Ajax code, though. You can use that setup or WebSockets, but if you didn't get WebSockets done, I don't want to require that. Plus, WebSockets are a little bit, there's a little bit extra to do to be able to validate those, but whatever method you want, whatever is going to be easiest for you, or whatever you just choose, even if you don't choose the easiest one. So authenticated chat, escape your HTML, and then cross-site request forgery tokens. We did this back in homework 2. We had the cross-site request forgery tokens, but they didn't completely make sense because we couldn't associate a token with a user. But now that we have authentication, we can associate tokens with specific users. So you're not just checking if the token is valid, you're checking if that token is valid and it was issued to this particular user that's associated with this particular authentication token. So we have actual cross-site request forgery tokens that work, because an attacker would not be able to get a token that's valid for that account, whereas before any token was valid for anybody. So an attacker could access your site, get a token, and then put that token in their attack script. and still circumvent what we were trying to do. Now we actually get the full power of these tokens. I guess we could do session tokens in homework 2, but I have to do cookies earlier. Anyway, we can get good cross-site request forgery tokens. And finally, HTTPS. I should just label this HTTPS. For this, you have to run your app. We're finally moving out of port 8080 and running your app on ports 80 and 443. You have to run both of them simultaneously. The recommended solution that I'll go over in lecture is to use Nginx for this as a reverse proxy. Nginx will be listening on both ports, and then if it's a request on 443, it'll do all the encryption stuff. If it's a listening on port 80, it won't do encryption, and in either case, it's going to forward the request to your server. And we'll see how to do that. If you want to do this away without Nginx, I'm leaving the wording of this open enough that you don't have to, but it's going to be the strongly recommended solution. To not use Nginx may or may not be significantly difficult. And then instead of specifying a port, we're just going to use HTTP localhost to access your site, and then HTTPS localhost to access your site. And this is the big one. This is the one that's going to earn you points on this one. This first part, hosting just on HTTP, because before I hear these complaints, hosting it just on HTTP without HTTPS doesn't mean you did half the objective, just means you changed your port from 8080 to 80. And I mean, no. But once you get the encryption and host your site on HTTPS, now I know you really did the thing. And that's homework 4. So let's see what reports we want to talk about. PM, AM. Flask sock. Ooh, that's a good one. Tried digging through it yesterday, and it's a pain. Not Flask sock IO, by the way. It's the Flask sock. I think Flask IO uses. I think both libraries use the same underlying code, but we'll find out today. We'll go through it. Can the username be displayed in one point file with the same color as the background? I mean, no. I think in some of these things I specify, like the grader should be able to understand what's going on. You can personalize things. I mean, I could put this note on absolutely everything, but it'd be redundant. You can personalize things, but it needs to be clear to the grader. Here I'm talking about visit counters, but with everything. As long as it's clear to the grader. And I only put this message on one of the testing procedures, but it's implied that this is everywhere. So all the testing procedures say port 8080, but if you did objective 5, we can access it. We're going to access it through ports 80 or 443. We'll find your site. We'll find your stuff if it's there on any of those 3 ports. Can my cert be signed by Jesse? I actually wanted to do that. I never set it up, but I actually did want to do that, where I would issue certificates and be a certificate authority. Didn't quite get there. Does it have to be self-signed? You don't really have another option. If you can get it signed by a certificate authority, go for it. But I don't see that happening. The issue is they're not going to sign a cert for localhost. If you want to deploy your app with a domain name and get a cert, that'd be cool, but we also wouldn't be able to test it following the testing procedures because we're going to test on localhost. But if you could, I guess you could somehow get a cert signed for your IP address. I don't know if any certificate authorities would do that. But if you could, it doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. I'm trying to make that work, but no, it's just not going to work. You get a certificate with a domain that points to localhost. That could work. I mean, the graders wouldn't know about it, though. You'd have to communicate to the grader somehow. Maybe on your HTML, give a link to that site with the cert. All right, any other questions on homework 4? And of course, we have 3 weeks to go over how to do all that and go over everything in detail. Okay, Flask sock was the only recommendation, so let's do exactly that. Okay, so let's collapse a lot of this stuff. Let's go to our requirements and import the thing. Flask sock install. Actually, let me also, just to have some fun with this, socket.io. Hopefully that's the right one, installed successfully. And Flask server from Flask sock, import, give me some options. Well, I can get into it anyway. That's all I really need, I guess. Let's just import the whole library. And import Flask socket.io. That gives us our entry point into the libraries. That's all I really need. Close other tabs. So what we want to do with these WebSocket libraries, one of the big, I guess 3 big things that I'm looking for. But one of the most obvious things that I'm looking for is that globally unique ID. And with any WebSocket library I went through, it's tough to get there. So let's try to get there today. Hopefully by the end of the lecture, we're looking at a globally unique ID. If I can't find it, I've done WebSocket libraries in JavaScript before during lectures. And by the end of lecture, I can't find it, and I just cheat, and I go into lib and just search for the globally unique ID. Then wherever I find it, I know it's one of those. So we can do that as a last-ditch effort. But let's try to get there legitimately. The problem is, I believe it was JavaScript we were going through. And the problem was it worked through a lot of interfaces. So I get to the interface, but I couldn't get to the concrete implementation, and it wasn't clear exactly how it does what it's supposed to do. And then the deployed version was written in Django, and the grader can't see the backend code? What do you mean?
You let someone post it on their own domain, you can't see the backend code. So
Oh, right. Right. Well, it was hosting a domain that points to localhost. So they would still run the app locally on localhost, and then go to the domain, which...
So the grader would run it on localhost, put the link, and make it redirect it to the same place. Right, because they have to get the link somehow.
Yeah, right. Because that deployed app can't just make calls to localhost, because those couldn't be encrypted. Yeah, it would just have to be a redirect. And then, yeah, we can't encrypt that. I want to do this now. How do we encrypt localhost without a self-signed cert? I mean, it doesn't make sense why we would want to anyway, but still, as a technical challenge, it's bugging me. There's got to be a way. All right, so Flask sock. Let's take a look at this thing. I don't believe I've ever been inside this library, so this would be a good example of what I expect you to do, going into a library completely confused and trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So we have a sock class. Not much code. You'll find that with a lot of these libraries. There's really not a lot going on, at least at the top level. All the details are hidden. Kind of like if you look at my server when I have it set up with the router and everything. There's not much going on at the top level. Everything's abstracted out through multiple layers of inheritance, and polymorphism, and all kinds of silly stuff going on. So we have a socket class. Registering blueprints, neat. All right. Creating a WebSocket route, looks good. Looks like by default it's going to be /WS, maybe? I'm going to skim this, so I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of details wrong, but let's see what's going on. So we're going to get the route. So this is all HTTP stuff, it looks like. What is this? Simple WebSocket, and at this point, we're probably already out of that library, if I'm reading that right. So we're already outside of the library. So this is another thing you'll find a lot of libraries don't, even after the top level, those abstractions are in different libraries. You're going to quickly get outside of the library that you actually imported. You'll notice this for those of you using JavaScript. I know most of you aren't for the homework, but more of you might be for the project using Node for it. Express, which is like the framework for Node apps. It's like the web framework. Does almost nothing. Like almost nothing. It adds the idea of middleware, but other than that, it's just using Node's HTTP library for almost all of the functionality. So you'll find that a lot. FlashSock is just going to be a wrapper class. That's going to, we even have the word wrapper here. That's going to be a wrapper class that an adapter, I think we call them, that lets the socket library that it's actually going to use interface with the way Flask likes to do things. That's all this library is going to do. A lot of libraries do that. And this is the part that I want to talk about. So we have different modes that this can run in. We can either use eventlet, I always forget how to pronounce this. I think it's G-unicorn is what it's supposed to be. I always used to call it Gunicorn. And Wsgi, which I got to learn how to pronounce that as well, which you're going to find a lot in your Python code. This library does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to web stuff. So one of those three modes, and we're going to be using one of these libraries. Or let me see if I can. WS mode isn't red again. Raise stop iteration, connection error. And then eventlet is the only one that it wants to use. Socket equals true. Okay, but the big one is this server. So let's get into this library. So we're going to use this simple WebSocket library, which is, wait, hold on. Site packages. And how do I tell if it's part of Python itself or if this is a library that we got? Is there a Python library in here? Yeah, anyway. So we got this separate library regardless. Init does almost nothing. WS is where we want to be. So this is going to create a WebSocket, some buffering, 4K default buffer, good to know, I guess. Is going to create a WebSocket server. So let's look through this and figure out what's going on. So if we have these same three things, cool. We're seeing some consistency already. We're going to use one of these three libraries for the actual WebSockets is what I'm seeing here, is what it seems like is happening. Yeah, become your own CA. You say Gunicorn? I think it's G-unicorn is like what it's supposed to like be, but I don't know if that's how people pronounce it. Like it's a unicorn is part of the library. And something. So we want to look at these three things. So let's just pick one of them. Environment.get. What is environment? Environment is a Wsgi environment dictionary with the request details. Each web server does it in a different way. Are the only web servers that are currently supported. So one of these ones, and let's go to that Wsgi, because that's what you're likely to see elsewhere as well. So now we have to do some jumping here, because finding that library, like we can't even see where it's imported, because it's going to be imported somewhere else. We have this mode set, and then this mode somewhere else is going to be used. So let's find usages. By the way, using an ID like PyCharm is very helpful when doing these things. So let's find the usages of this. I don't think that's the right variable. Flask sock is going to read those. We already saw that code. It's where they're set. Command line tools, I don't think that's where we want to be. Vendor requests, PyMongo, it's probably not the same variable. PyMongo, probably not the same variable. All right, well, that's a bust. So what I want to do is grab this string and find the library. Like eventually that mode should be used in a dynamic import. Like we're importing this package based on the value of that variable. What you can do in Python, you can have a string, and then whatever that string is, import a library or a package with that name. Somewhere that's going to happen, but I'm failing to find it. So I'm just going to search this, find in files, serving.py. Okay, so we're in the Wsgi library. We're in a file named serving.py. Oh boy. Where was that? Serving.py, which uses it as a string. It's this kind of stuff that, like, where do we go from here? This is where you really get stuck with these reports. Where do I go from here? We have a string set to some abstract connection. You kind of get stuck pretty quick. But we know we're using Wsgi as the WebSocket library. At some point, your socket server, by the way, let's take a look at socket server, forking mixin, threaded Wsgi server. So here's where our TCP stuff is. So we kind of stumbled upon some TCP stuff. So that's good. That's good news. With threading, except they're using Wsgi. This is something we don't use in the course. This is an interface to be able to run Python and have it work through other web servers like Nginx and Apache. We don't need to do it for the homeworks, but it's something we could do. We don't need Wsgi. So somewhere in here, we're doing WebSockets. Let's try to just search WebSocket. Not in here at all. So I'm going to go through this library and try to find some WebSocket stuff. HTTP proxy, not going to be in debug. Sanzio, multi-part request parsing, that's good stuff too. We're in the right location. We're in the right location. We're finding some stuff that that is where we want to be. We have line breaks defined. Look at that, /r/n. We're feeling good about where we're at the very least. We're in the right library that actually does the stuff. This is the library that does web stuff in Python. Everybody's using this. A request and a response class, good stuff. Good stuff here. If I search headers, it's probably going to be, in this file about 1,000 times. 88 times. This is all about parsing headers and handling requests, responses. We should be able to see that, well, probably not /r/n, but line break. Oh. But why? I read all of that and I didn't see it. All right, I'm getting sidetracked. WebSockets. Base requests. This is probably where line breaks are. Oop. Request again, response again. Test URLs, utils. So we're getting close to a dead end here. Where do you do WebSockets? $88 is approximately 1,000. Just to humor myself, I'll go into debug. Nope. All right, let's go back up a library and see if we can learn something more up here. Equals environment.get. What was this? Environment. So let's try a different strategy. There's our server. Oh, there it is. Internal and external libraries. And let's use this library. Flasksock.server. It's not how Python works. Incorrect arguments. We have environment is the one required call. And what do you use for environment? Do you use the app itself? Nicholas, how do you use this? How do you use the library? I don't feel like looking up documentation right now.
So instead of flasksock.server, it would be flasksock.sock.
Take me there. Oh. All right. And this is sock, which then, okay. So now let's run this in the debugger and see if we get to that breakpoint. See if we can learn anything from the debugger. And the answer is no. Okay, so app, that's your app or our app. Self has nothing in it yet because we're in the constructor. Let's go through some, let's see, init app. Oh, we're already out of it. Okay, I clicked too much. None, app, init, self.app. If self.app is none, so it's not none. Init app, which does nothing. Why am I not learning anything here? And then all right, so that's a bust. That happens. We'd probably have to actually use, why didn't we get setting up the server? Or does it happen on run? Let's just see. BBC OS. PCOS. I want to be in these things. Somehow we're back here. Okay, I don't think that's going to be fruitful within lecture. But that would be a route that you want to go down, is run the debugger, see what you can learn from that debugger. All right, so let's, we're getting towards the end here, so let's get at least something. So let's take a look at our kind of shortcut. We're going to take this globally unique ID. This is part of the WebSocket protocol, so we know this has to exist. I'm going all the way to the top, find in files. Let's see where we can find this. So WebSockets, that sounds like a good one. That's in my code. Okay, cross that one off the list. Constants and utilities, let's go to constants. WS constants. So we don't have a bridge to the WS library yet, but we do find our globally unique ID, and we can find usages of this and see if we can get back to a library that we know about. That's the this is in JavaScript. Okay, good catch. Let's go back. Because I'm in node modules. Oh, goodness. I'm still going for this. Find in files, utilities.py. All right, it's our last choice. It's our last option. Find usages. Let's see what library we're in. WS Proto. Is this in site packages? All right, all right. WS Proto. So there's some homework looking code. This is the only code in here that does WebSocket accept, apparently. So this method is our endpoint. This is where we want to get at some point. And by the way, you know, that's basically the homework code. Like, there's only one way to do it. Though if it's cut and paste and you have these same variable names and everything, bless you, then, you know, that's not so good. So let's see where this is used. See if we can get back to a library that we are aware of and work our way backwards. This is one thing we can do with WebSocket specifically because we know that unique ID has to exist in it. Establish connection, we're still in internals. Establish client connection, is there an establish accept, find usage, WS Proto handshake. We're send. See where this is called, find usages, lots of them. A lot of dynamic usages. Flask uses it directly. Probably because this is used for more than, looks like this is going to be used for more than just WebSockets. Tearing down. Socket.io for what it's worth. Not exactly what we were looking for, but we did find the link from Socket.io for what it's worth. But we would need to get to one of those three libraries that probable usage, one of those other libraries, Flash, Socket.io, Hi Mongo, simple WebSocket, and Socket.io. IO namespace. I mean, that might be it. And then we're server defined. Namespace. We're way deep inside all this stuff. Oh, we're in Socket.io again. We don't want Socket.io. Simple WebSocket, I believe, was one of the ones that we saw at some point, if I'm not mistaken. Sock.send out data. So we're getting close here. This is in the base class, which I'm assuming is used for inheritance. Find usages. Usage as superclass client of base. No, I want server. Server of base. Which is in simple WebSocket. This class is where we were before, right? This is a win, right? What was the path again? Oh, because this extends base. Yeah, server extends base. Base has the socket. For WebSocket connections. This calls send. Oh, God. And it's abstracted, so it doesn't know which send to take me to on the control click. But ws.send is taking us to ws-proto, which is where the actual stuff happens. Hey, at 101, we're on the right track. Check connection. Somewhere in here is going to be the accept. Generate accept token, and we got to the code. So we got our chain. We're feeling good about that with not too much time left, but we got there. I'm happy about that. And then what we need are links to all of this code. Now, all of this is open source code. So I'm going to do, so we still need to get the actual links. That's just to find your path and find what you're looking for. I'm going to try this. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to grab a line of code that I'm looking for and just search it with quotes. And hopefully get there. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Source code for ws-proto utils. This would work. I think the Python source code is not on GitHub, if I'm not mistaken. But as long as you find a link like that, which takes us there. That's not the right one. But the second link was, looks like it was the source code for Python, for ws-proto at least. Let's try to take that one step further. ws-proto GitHub. Hey, it is on GitHub. All right, and what were we actually looking for? And you would do this for each link in that chain. You would go to the library on GitHub or any open source, anywhere to find it online. ws-proto utils 85 would be one step of the chain. Source utils 85. And then when you link it in your reports, you can click this line number and get the link for that exact line number. So if I go in a different tab and paste that link, it's going to take me right to the line number. Please, please, please do this. This will be part of the feedback. If you don't do this, it'll be part of the feedback when we do the round of feedback for reports. Please link the exact line number. Some of these files are, this one, it's not that important. Some of these files are thousands of lines, though. Don't just say, it's somewhere in this file. If you say that, we're going to assume that you didn't actually look through that code and figure out what's going on. Give a link to the line number and say, this method is being called on this line number, so we know exactly where to look for that stuff. If you just say, somewhere in this thousands of lines, the stuff happens, come on. That's in the center of a chain. It wouldn't be as critical. But I've seen a lot of times where students are calling like server.run. And then they say, server.run, it's in this file with thousands of lines. That's where the stuff happens. I know you didn't go through any of that at that point. So give links to the specific line numbers when you're going through. If you're actually going through all this, you're going to want to give the line numbers because it took you a lot of time to find them. So give the line numbers. And GitHub gives us that nice tool to do that. So that's the idea. That's what I expect. Take all that information, go each link of the chain. This method uses this method, goes through this interface, which has this implementation. Go through all of that, and a link for each step of the process. You don't have to get too detailed on what it is. Just say this uses calls this method calls this method, this method calls this method. But I do want to see the links to each code, like this, like we did here. I want to see all those steps in the chain to go from your code to the code that actually does the thing. This is code that actually does the thing. We're actually taking a key and computing the accept, just like you did in your Websocket homework, or are still doing in your Websocket homework, I suppose. All right, any questions on this? So, frame, yeah, and we'd have to, so I didn't finish that sentence earlier. The 3 things I'm looking for with WebSockets, the handshake, which we got to here, the parsing frames and writing frames. I would want to see parsing and writing frames as well. So you still have to go through this process for the other 2 sides of WebSockets. But at this point, you know where the code is, you know where you're looking, you're in the right library, and then you can start going from there. Do I want to remove the report requirement? No. What I think I'll do next semester is just force reports on everyone. Just say you can't use homework code. But I got to figure out exactly the details of how to do that. All right, we're at 10:50, so let's go. Have a great weekend. See everyone Monday.